This week on Political Capital, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce on the Middle East and Ukraine, Walter Dellinger on what's next for Obamacare, Phil Mattingly on Congress' to-do list, and Margaret Carlson and Megan McArdle debate Paul Ryan's poverty proposal and who's going to win the Georgia Senate race. We begin the program with House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce of California. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being with us. So many crises in the world, you hardly know where to start, but let's start with Ukraine. After the Malaysian airline tragedy, rather than contrition, Putin seems to be doubling down on his aggression, firing across the border, sending personnel in there. The Ukrainians, the Russian sympathizers have downed 2 more Ukrainian transport planes. What can we do to stop him?
Well, I think the one thing that might stop him is if the international community all weigh in. We know we can do more to get sector sanctions from the U.S., but the question is, can we get Europe, can we get the international community to go along? I think we might be at the point where we can, and second, I would say, having been in eastern Ukraine not too long ago, when I talk to Russian-speaking Ukrainians, they've had about enough of the kinds of people that he's bringing into the conflict. You know, up on social media, the Russians are recruiting every malcontent and skinhead who will pick up arms and bringing them into eastern Ukraine.
So you think sector-wide sanctions may be imminent and the Europeans might go along?
I think they might. Now, remember, the Dutch were dragging their feet before. Now they're leading the charge. So I think they might, because now with the Russians opening up with artillery barrages on the Russian side of the border and firing on Ukrainian targets, this is something nobody anticipated. This is an act of war directly by Russia against Ukraine. It's a real shock.
You've been to Ukraine, recently. Assess their situation politically and economically. You know, a high minister resigned this week. They seem to be economically teetering. Should we be supplying emergency aid?
You know what we need to supply them from is the one area where the Russians have them by the throat is with gas. If we could take our excess LNG, remember, we're flaring gas here in the United States because we have a glut. We're capping wells. If we could ship that, now that the Poles have almost completed their new LNG facility and they've reversed engineered.
Can we get it there in time?
We can get it there, and also there's another. I was in Azerbaijan recently as well. The Azeris want to ship their gas into Eastern Europe. If we were to do those 2 things for the future, it would give a lot of confidence for investment in Ukraine, because it would mean they wouldn't be solely dependent on Russia.
Turning to the Middle East, the violence in Gaza has spread to the West Bank. If Secretary Kerry's call for a ceasefire doesn't hold, what are the implications?
My hope is that ceasefire holds. That's the only thing I see right now. We've got to work with every party to try to get that ceasefire to hold. And there's one other thing we should point out here. The only reason they're able to fire these longer range rockets that they're firing at Tel Aviv and, you know, at Jerusalem is because those rockets were all provided by Iran. The other actor in this is the Ayatollah in, you know, giving this inventory to Hamas.
You, I know, have been critical of extending the nuclear talks with Iran. Are you going to initiate more sanctions?
Here's my critique, Al, on this. I wasn't against extending the sanctions or extending the time period in the negotiation. My question was, why should they be rewarded with a lessening of the sanctions? And you heard that from both sides of the aisle. There was some concern there that they were running out the clock. If this deal falls apart, I have legislation authored by me and Elliot Engel of New York. 400 members supported this on the floor.
Until it falls apart.
Of course. We'll wait. We want the negotiations to work, but we want to have some credible leverage on at the end of this deal to say, if it doesn't work, we will implode the economy, because we can't afford them to have undetectable breakout capability.
Mr. Chairman, let's turn to Iraq. You have regretted the fact that the administration didn't use drone attacks on ISIS months ago. They didn't. Now, you have any indication they're going to start to do that, or where are we at this stage?
I think they're still contemplating it. It's been under consideration for many, many months, but as you know, our embassy called this to their attention. Certainly the Iraqi government made the request. Why drone attacks? Because when they're bivouacked or you know, when you've got an encampment and they're flying the black flag of Al-Qaeda, it's easy to see where they are. When they're on the open road going from village to village or town to town, a drone can get right up above them, look down, and the armed drone can see if these are militants, you know, with the flag flying on the jeeps. And if it's so, we could have been taking out these units.
What are the odds? What are the odds we'll do it now, do you think?
Well, I think the odds are probably getting better that some kind of action like that is taken, because the UN raised the issue yesterday. You have this new edict in Mosul that women, girls have to be circumcised. Every girl under the age of 39 or whatever the edict was. I mean, the enormity of the impact of something like that, and that region is about 4 million people right there, or 4 million women in Mosul and in the surrounding region. I mean, this really, I think, clarifies the thinking. This is a very, very doctrinaire Al-Qaeda operation franchise, and it requires action. It doesn't require U.S. boots on the ground, but it does require some kind of action to suppress. By the way, when you're up against jihadists, infantry troops often run away. Why? Because the jihadists don't mind being martyred. They need some kind of cover. Armed drones can give that coverage.
As I said, there are crises all over the world, including in Central America. The leaders of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador are in Washington. They're now talking about a Marshall Plan for those strapped countries.
What I've suggested to them before, and I had a chance to meet with President Hernandez. I met with the president of Guatemala and Honduras yesterday. What I have suggested to them and their foreign ministers is more a Plan Colombia. The Plan Colombia really worked, in which we worked on the ground in Colombia to, because they had the political will in Colombia, and because we gave them the wherewithal, they were able to take on the narco traffickers and really turn that society around.
Doing there.
That's what we should be doing in these three countries.
Let me ask you, Secretary Kerry, year and a half in office, how would you assess his performance so far?
Well, it depends upon the issue. I personally was a critic of the idea of not having sufficient leverage against the Ayatollah. I felt we should have passed the sanctions bill through the Senate and then had that sitting there with that threat. I am glad right now that he is attempting to negotiate this ceasefire in Gaza. I wish him well. I see he got the UN on the ground there. I see perhaps a long-term role there for the UN, you know, maybe with inspectors. If we could ever disarm, if we could get the Palestinian Authority to assist with the idea of disarming in that area, we could get a deal that would be supported.
Sounds like Professor Royce would give him about a B.
Yeah, okay. Well, on some issues, I think he's done a good job.
Mr. Chairman.